Having none of those, we'll skip the election of the chair and election of the vice chair. All right, we have our first topic. Is Bonnie attending? I see her name on here.
Check off on the calendar, but you can't tell if she wanted to guess or not.
So maybe she might come later if you want to defer her item.
Okay. All right, next up, contingency funding. John?
Okay. At the June 21st board meeting, we brought forth the resolution for establishing the GRTC contingency funding policy that had currently existed back through September of 2013, which had a 15% contingency fund target. As part of the fiscal 23 operating budget adoption, we contemplated increasing that to 25%. When we were talking at the meeting, we wanted to look at the actual process or how the contingency funding policy works with regards to funding and the uses. So what we had in the resolution was the exact language that was adopted back in September 2013, and I think that it was referred to the Finance Committee to look at that language and possibly make some suggestions for changes for that. I know that we talked about, there was some concern about the section where it was increases in funding of the contingency fund will occur in two ways. And I think we had a short discussion. Currently it is that the CFAO on a monthly basis has the authority to move funds if it's less than 100,000, and if it's over 100,000, it would have to be brought by an action of the board. As I think briefly discussed, I concur. I mean, I don't see the rationale for doing it on a month-to-month basis because you have some ebb and flows. I would prefer, as we report on the year and we have the definitive answer as to whether there is a surplus or deficit at that time, bringing it forward. So I took the liberty of just kind of removing bullet point 1 and recrafting bullet point 2 to basically just say that proposed funds to be moved to the contingency fund will be brought to the board of directors for board approval.
Does our packet have your updated version, or is it? I feel like I just see the June 21st version.
Yeah, that's what we disseminated, but I did prepare it.
It sends a link. Oh, thanks for that.
Track changes.
Document. Thank you.
Do you want our comments, or do you want to keep going?
No, it's. I think the rest of it. The next part of it talks about how the funds will be assessed, or the contingency fund. Basically, the CEO is consulting with the chairman of the board and gets approval, or the matter is brought before the board for approval. And then on the page 2, it kind of just lays out some categories which would be eligible for utilizing the contingency fund. So I don't have any changes with regards to those parts, and I defer to the members of the Finance Committee for their input as to if there's anything they would wish to change with regards to that as well.
If I can just jump in, unless anybody disagrees, or wants to go first, but I appreciate the shift on them moving from month to month to yearly, because I have a hard time understanding the same about why you would do it monthly versus in small deposits versus throughout the course of the year determining where you are surplus or deficit, and again, and then depositing those reserves that you think are surpluses that you think are available, putting them into reserves makes tons of sense so that you can keep up with your 25% goal, et cetera, et cetera. So I appreciate the red line there. I think that covers a lot of my comments from the last meeting. This is more for the board, which is like, what are we comfortable with as far as CAO authority, CEO authority?
Expenditures. On expenditure side.
Yeah, on the expenditure side, which is, look, in my mind, I would propose that the CEO has the authority in then in the time of need to do this with reporting to the board out, right? And then you have CEO accountability if for every reason the board feels that that was a misuse or otherwise. I worry about saying one board member, even the chairman, is single authority to say yes or no. In some ways, I would understand that most of the time the CEO is probably going to talk to the board and make sure they're not going to get in trouble later before they make a move like this. But I think as far as establishing the authority, I would want the CEO to be able to tap reserves to cover a deficiency, at their discretion and authority with reporting, and it feeds into the overall accountability of the CEO.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I would ask you, John, is there two questions? Current practice, if you're using contingency funds, current practice is the CEO would contact the chair, they would discuss it, agree, and do it. There's been no, because it looks like it's been board authority to fund the contingency, but no board authority to spend the contingency. Is that, am I correct in reading that, or did I miss a lot?
Yeah, I think that this hasn't been utilized. I mean, just in perspective, there is, as of June 30th, there's about $5.77 million that's in the contingency, which is about 8.95% of the adopted fiscal.
Well, have we had like contingency of merit, like a value? Have we had a contingency fund for quite some time?
It's been there for quite a while.
Yeah. So yeah, I would agree with Lincoln. I think funding it is excellent. At the end of the year, you look at the CFO makes the decision. Here's the surplus. I think we should fund it. I think we should have a goal. I think the 25% goal is great. It's a quarter, right? It's 3 months. It's a quarter of the year. I think if we were be able to sustain ourselves in godforsaken pandemic, emergency, whatever, that's great. On the expenditure side, I fully agree. I think the CEO should have the discretion to do it. I don't know. I would ask your opinion. What is a relative amount of money that can and should be able to be moved quickly for discretionary use, then to be reported back? And then what would be a number where you would say, we should probably contact the board before we spend $250,000? Like, what is that number? I would ask for your professional advice on that, because it should be there.
One question though, or one point is that we have used the contingency fund to fill in cash flow gaps.
Correct.
And we've done that up to, a couple $1 million, I think.
Yes.
Almost like serving as your own bank, so you're not using a line of credit. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's what a business, that's what my business does.
Yeah.
If you build your business to a point where you can do that. I love
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that flexibility is, if you're borrowing money and putting it back, that is a notification to the board. I'm great.
Particularly if we're dealing with a situation where you're waiting for your federal funding, CBTA funding, et cetera. I mean, any number of things could cause a 30-day delay that could screw up your cash flow.
We
And
have
that's
to,
been the mindset that we've said, go ahead if we know that the money's coming in.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because
I think we have to allow for that.
they're segregated bank accounts. So this isn't its own unique. So what Gary's referring, I believe, was in 2020, there were some periods of, the July, August months were kind of heavy by the time we're waiting for the reimbursements to come in, as Lincoln had suggested. And there were some large insurance payments that were going on at that time. So what they would do is they would bring it to the board for authorization to pull money out of the contingency bank account to fund the operating one, and then they would report back in. That's kind of the mechanism of the cash flow report in the board packages.
But it makes sense to have some type of, now we have a finance committee, which I think is the whole point of saving the board from finance minutiae. I think that's part of the point. Would it be something that we write in there that you would feel comfortable with by saying money moved up in this range, up to this amount would entail a notification of the finance committee? And then if it reached a certain point, you'd say, of which this point, finance committee would move the item to the board for approval. I think that would be really sensible. I still would defer to you on where those limits are. I don't want to say that it's X number. I think that you guys have been here long enough to know that.
I'll be honest, I would be comfortable not even setting a ceiling on it. It's essentially, I think if we could set it up so that the CAO uses the contingency, the board, either through full board or finance committee, is notified, right? In that moment, quick route, whatever. And then, we would convene if we felt like we needed to do something, or I just feel like all we need to do is be told. It's a disclosure versus authority, right? It's with disclosure, you can trust the CEO to manage the operation, say, hey, due to a temporary cash flow issue, we're tapping using $4 million of our 16 million in contingency, assuming we get to that level. We anticipate that that would be replenished by federal funds within the next month. By the time we get that together to the board, we know yes or no, did or didn't. And so I'm comfortable with no cap on the approval for expenditure, and just trust the CDO to do it. But just, I think we need to include a clause that says, the board will be notified in a reasonable, in expeditious time period.
John, would I be correct in saying that given the CDTA money and how we're collecting our cash flow, we shouldn't run into monthly issues with cash flow not being enough, waiting on payment because we're collecting a year in advance, basically, right?
That is correct.
So any time that we need to dig into this, it's probably going to be a semi-serious event, if not a serious event.
I really appreciate everything you're saying. I hate to jump in, but that's exactly the case. Some of the reasons why these are coming out of the financial policies pre-John and pre-all were that we didn't have this CDTA fund as helping with our cash flow. They were, when we got to the beginning of fiscal year, we had a lot of our expenses would hit us at the beginning of fiscal year, but we didn't have any cash coming. And then there was also issues with the federal government. Sometimes they have issues with the flow of money and reimbursements. So a lot of these issues are legacy issues that I don't think apply anymore. So the policy issues you're talking about are very much relevant to the organization as it stands now as you're moving forward. So I just wanted to give that as a clarifying point. That's the reason why these were issues in the past. I don't think they're issues for you in the future.
What is the contingency fund at now?
It's at 5.77.
5.7.
Yes.
So theoretically, if we built it to that 25% number, and it basically just sits there. It's not something you would tap in for a capital project because you have a different surplus fund that you would use for that. So once we build it to this point, it should just be what it is, a contingency fund.
Yeah, and then in a, equivalent of a state of emergency, the CEO could tap it for whatever they need to maintain operations in whatever form. And I just, quite frankly, I feel like that is the sort of discretion you want built into a, essentially part-time board versus a full-time professional CEO, that they have that discretion, and any accountability for that would come at the CEO level. If for whatever reason anything was done inappropriately or for the wrong reasons, or I would think any good CEO would likely be ensuring they had the board support before they really took the action, but not need the board to convene or a single chairperson. I mean, because the flip of this could almost be a chairperson directing them to use the reserve to do something that doesn't have board consensus, right? That's kind of why I'm not comfortable. I just, if it's board approval, it's board approval. I don't think the chair should be endowed with separate authority from the president.
I fully concur with that.
Yeah.
We can kind of clarify, because I think there's two issues here. There's the cash flow of using the contingency fund, which is kind of, as Julie alluded to, it's not an issue right now with the CBTA funding, because we do the draw basically the first week of each quarter down, and that's why you see our cash flow is kind of like a sawtooth. It's high, then goes down. So I think the other purpose of the contingency fund is if there's a unbudgeted initiative or unfunded initiative that needs to get, chances are that's going to be issuing a contract, which we bring to the board anyway. And when we do that, we also talk about the funding. So if it's something that wasn't contemplated in the adopted either operating or capital plan for the year, that would be something that would come together in conjunction as well with contracts. It would probably be material spend over 50,000 or so like that, or over 100. So, but that those I would feel strongly that we would bring it to the board at those if it was something that was not budgeted and needed a new funding source above the material. I mean, our current materiality for coming to the board is the contract's over a certain amount. So be consistent with that overriding policy.
Makes sense. So do we want to just tweak this and maybe just send it to the committee unless there's any further changes needed, bring it to the next full board meeting for approval? I mean, I feel like
Are we clear on what we're saying here? Are we clear? We're basically saying that our anticipation is that the CEO is going to come to the board, but they're not required to come to the board for advance.
Yeah, I think in the terms of the policy, it's the CEO.
You've got language there already. You use it already where it says CEO consults with the chairman of the board and gets approval from the chairman. I would say CEO consults with the board, but has the discretionary authority to use emergency units.
Yeah.
Seen fit.
That's why I put that point out there, that any event that we need to use it, it's going to be a serious event. So
I would use
chances
the-
are we're going to have the boards going to.
I would use the word consults with, and I would use the word notification.
Yeah.
Like I think the board, or at least the finance committee, should be notified of it.
Yeah, so immediate notification.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with saying the CEO will notify the board, concurrent with any use of the reserve for one of the stated purposes. I don't know, now I'm mixing the language here.
Yeah, no, I get what you're
Refers to
saying.
the stated purposes here, right? Like, again, your payroll, you need a new bus, you got a parts expense, you got fuel, you got utilities. I mean, these are operational necessities that are approved uses for the contingency at the CEO's discretion with notification on the board. Any way to language that, I think you guys could draft it.
John, you feel like you captured that?
Yeah, I think I can wordsmith it a little bit.
Okay. Okay, good. Now, are we going to vote on things in the committee before they go to, when you've presented it like it should be acted on?
It will be up to the committee to decide how it wants to function. I think under normal Robert's rules, the committee would vote on it, and then you would take it to the board and require one motion of the committee. You wouldn't have to have a second on the board, but so the committee would present it as a motion, but you would act on it with a recommendation, take it to the full board. The chair would then present it to the board. You wouldn't need a second, and then the board would vote on it.
Is that what we've put into the guidelines for the
It
committee?
is not as specific.
Okay.
It's generally following Robert's rules.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead, we'll go ahead and vote on it for the minutes. I'm assuming somebody's taking that. Okay.
And I would, if I could just put a pin in it, so I think it's a good discussion to talk about how much of this is work session versus a formal committee, like a chance to discuss things and get to consensus of what will come to the board the next time.
Yeah, this feels very much like a work session.
Yes, and so that's kind of where my headed would be for the committees, but I also, we can always iterate our way around it. Like, essentially the committee action is to recommend we bring it to the board, in its amended form.
And I fully concur, and on the airport commission, I think it is done that way. The motion would come from the committee. I do enjoy, I want it to be a work session. It should be, it is. When a recommendation comes from this committee, that should serve as the motion to the full board.
Yeah.
That's the way it works best.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll operate that way until otherwise decided. Okay. All right, good. So you'll put that together.
I'll put together, I can recirculate it.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Okay. Super. Good. All right. How about is Bonnie now here?
That's
Okay, okay.
If I can just really quickly, I know that if I might.
Go ahead.
Okay. There was a question at the last board meeting about the CPI and the use of it in CBTA. I did reach out to Eric Gregory, who is the legal counsel for CBTA on these issues. He deferred back to Bonnie. I know that Ben also reached out and asked Bonnie as GRTC legal counsel to form an opinion on how we were applying the rules. She did that. Ben sent it out to everyone. The intention was to have her to come and explain that in more detail. I guess she wasn't able to come. If we can either have a further discussion in her absence, I would probably suggest that it be deferred, or I don't know if you were able to see what she wrote.
I got to be honest, I read it, but I haven't thought any further about it. And so I would be glad to defer that conversation to the next one. This is something we're going to talk about for a while.
Yeah.
I think that the key issue is it sounded, not wanting to speak for her, but my interpretation was that she felt that the application that John put in was consistent with the law. However, there were questions about finance and accounting that
she would leave to the finances and accounting people to determine.
I'm the same. I read it in depth. I mean, I understand. I read it. I clearly understand what she's saying. I think it is probably best that we don't need to finalize it now. We can defer that to that.
What I will hand out to you, because I know that it's the same resolution that was presented at the July meeting, but I took the table and put it on 8.5 and 11, so you can actually see the table. So I'll just share that with you all. You have that.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
I got it. So do we get a discount if they just came out that inflation's dropped a few percentage?
It's a one-way street.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are deferring that topic.
May I ask if you want to defer to the next finance committee meeting or you want to defer to the board?
Finance.
Yeah, unless does it cause any kind of timing issue? Good next time.
I think it's already in place for this year.
Good.
Yeah, it was adopted.
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into the pension discussion.
okay, I'm going to keep this as high level, and I'll go as deep as you guys want me to. What I'm going to talk from is the GASB 6768 document for the period of January 1, 2021 through December 31st, 2021. This is going to be utilized in our current pension audit that's ongoing with Brown Edwards. So the highlights, of the report I call out are starting on page 5. This is a schedule of employer contributions. It shows from 2012 to 2021. The second column from the left is the actuarially determined contribution. That basically is what the actuary is saying that the employer's contribution should be on each annual basis. The third column from the left is the actual employer contribution, which is a little bit less, it's short by about 714,000. This plan, just so that we're all the Old Dominion Transit Employees Disability and Retirement Allowance Fund, this is primarily the defined benefit pension plan for the collective bargaining unit folks. There's a handful of legacy exempt and excluded employees that are still in it. I think it's down to like 4 employees, but this plan was for everybody up until a point, I believe in 2002, then it was specific just for collective bargaining. So the employer and employee contribution rates and levels are established in the collective bargaining unit contract. So the 2.779 million is based upon the percentage times the active payroll that's covered. So that's one item to note. Flipping over to page 7, the money weighted rate of return. I'm just looking at this, obviously defined benefit pension plan. There's employee contributions, employer contributions, and there's returns on investments. As you can see, the time frame from 2014 through 2016, a little bit underperformance than the benchmarks, but as you can see that the investment policy was, it was revamped a little bit to include more equity, so you have higher returns. So the return has been, reasonably well from the period thereafter. So that's just another piece of this to consider. Moving on to page 10. This is the net pension liability slide where it's comparing the December 31st, 2020 versus the December 31st, 2021. The fiduciary net pension position as a percentage of total pension liability at 12/31/20 was 32.57%, and it's increased as of 12/31/2021 to 53.13%. So how did it get there? This plan, as of the audit for 12/31/20, is under depletion analysis based upon the funding percentage of 32%. It utilizes a discount rate, as you can see in the next group, of 2.76%, which basically almost mimics the 20-year tax-exempt municipal bond rate. And because action was taken in the current collective bargaining unit contract to increase both the employees and the employer contributions, with the assumption that additional employees would be hired, that there was a depletion analysis update that was done and said based upon the new funding levels, the depletion concern is gone. So that enables the actuary to use the higher discount rate. So lower discount rate, higher liability versus the asset. So you can see is with the lower discount rate, you had a pension liability of almost $119 million. With the higher discount rate, it drops to 79 million. The assets, the fiduciary net position, 38 million as of the end of 20 versus 42 at the end of 21. So therefore, it's kind of almost like an actual increase in the percentage. What I also want to do is we'll hold that point and we'll go to slide 12, which is basically the summary of the pension changes in net liability over a period of time. The first line, service cost, the 4.47 millions, there is a definition page on the back. The service cost is defined by the actuary as a portion of the actual present value of projected benefit payments that is attributable to a valuation year. So in layman's terms, the 4.47 million is the cost of pension benefits for that 12-month section in 21. So going down in the fiduciary net position, you see the two line items, the employer contributions and the member contributions, the 2,779,000 and the 1,851. That totals to about 4.6 million, which is about 130,000 greater than the actual cost. So what that's saying is you have $130,000 to put forth against the administrative expenses, which are below our 304,000, but you don't have anything to put forward against the unfunded balance. On the first slide where I showed the actually determined contribution was higher than what our actual employer contributions, that's the reason why. The ADC is recommending you put money in to address the deficiencies in the prior funding. So as of 12/31/21, we had a balance of $42 million in assets. As of June 30th of 2022, we have an asset balance of 34 million. Why is that? Obviously, we have negative market performance, but in addition, as members of the board, you're aware is that the amount of operators have been exiting, and when they're exiting, and being below budgeted headcount, we're not having the contribution rate put in by either the employer or the employee or the employer match. So the contributions are down, the investments are down, as well as a lot of the folks that are leaving, if they're not vested, basically they're entitled to their contributions plus interest. If they're vested, the plan has the provision that they don't have to just leave it vested until they're eligible to retire. They can take a lump sum. A lot of the people that are leaving are taking lump sums. So if you have someone that's been here for 5 to 7 years, they're withdrawing $25,000 to $30,000 out of the plan. So the audit for 12/31/21 that's currently in place with Brown Edwards will basically refer to that there is no depletion analysis and that everything is probably good. I'm going to probably work into a footnote to probably incorporate a lot of this, just so that if you just look at the audit report year on year and say, hey, this is great, the plan is very healthy, but just to kind of include some of these for full disclosure.
It's 22% down in 6 months.
Yes. It's a combination of draws as well as lack of contributions due to lower levels, lower than budget employee levels.
Make perfect sense.
So I think this is at the last board meeting, Mr. Cole had asked about the funding levels. That's kind of why this became an agenda item, so that we can talk about this. Obviously, there was, the plan that was put in place to raise the contributions was, kind of a step in the right direction, but I don't think it completely solves the whole problem of the defined benefit pension plan. The defined benefit pension plan is run by a pension committee of 2 folks from the GRTC side, which is myself and Angela Malloy, who's the director of HR, as well as two folks from the union side. We're currently reviewing the investment policy to update it a little bit. I think that the recommendation, one of the options from the investment advisor is to shift a little bit more out of fixed income into equities. So but that's not going to be the solving aspect of this plan. It's funding. It's as long as the employer contributions are less than the ADC, you don't really get a lot of traction. It's great to see like the 1 year 20% return on investments, but you're not going to be, statistically, you're not going to have that every year. So this is going to be something that has to be watched, and it's probably not unlikely that when the GASB 67, 68 report for 2022 is done, you may be back on a depletion analysis. analysis.
So Julie, was it before you that we negotiated the increased
It wasn't,
contribution? It was
when I
when you
first,
first came in.
when I first got here, just the history, I was made aware that our net liability was what I would consider extremely high. It was in the $72 million range. That was the same time we went into contract negotiations with the union. We had Milliman help us with some depletion analysis at that time, and it was, the union did not want to get rid of the pension. They feel very strongly that is a benefit that they want as a whole. And I understand that. So we worked with them to say, we'll increase the amount of money, employer contribution, but you also have to increase the amount of employee contribution. Milliman said we need to get about 30%. We got about to 27%. That hits this year. It's a lot. That's 15 from us, 12 for employees, which means that new employees, 12% of their salary is immediately going to the pension.
And that's for 1.5% benefit
Yeah.
per year times final 4-year average salaries.
Which is a financial point that most of our team does not understand, that most of our operators, they want that pension, they see the value of it, their parents had it, their parents' parents had it, they want to see that. So it fixed it. It was like putting a cast on a broken leg, with the intention that maybe as we started hiring more and more staff and we were expanding the CBT coming on board and more money would be going into it, it would solve that issue. COVID hit. We're now in more of an economic downturn and that cast is not working. It's still possible that it could come back and fix it, but it's not a perfect solution. Some of the things that John's brought to the table since he's been here have been looking as we go into the next union negotiation, having a consideration of a hybrid plan that will help convert maybe some new operators over. How do we do that and still retain our commitment to our senior operators and the people already in the retirement plan that they don't take a haircut? These are some pretty significant issues that need to be addressed over the next year before the union negotiations. And I think that you have an excellent resource in John to guide through that. So that's a little bit of history, but yes, that was when I first got here. We were very excited to be able to offer that. It was going to cost us more money. It's one of the reasons why our expenses are going up, because we committed to our employees to protect them and the retirement. And unfortunately, economic conditions did not work in our favor.
This is a non-ERISA, it's a government plan, so it's not, doesn't have the PBGC cover guarantee on it. So this is a strictly government plan.
Is the funding level something that we, board leadership, can contribute to through, essentially prioritization between, or is it strictly, it has to be the employer contributions and employee match and employer match and employee contributions? Or is it something that we have to consider prioritizing? So, we're supposed to be putting money in funded status for other OPEB, other post-employment benefits, which is mostly the healthcare side. But I didn't know if this is something do we need to put this on the list with things like achieving a 25% contingency reserve as an area that we would want to fund if we had surplus at the end of the fiscal year or otherwise?
It's an option, you can have it. I mean, what I've seen in my past lives is with collective bargaining unit DB plans is that there is in the contract, it has what the employee's contribution is. Very rarely did I have seen what the employer's contribution percentage was, always governed by what the actual evaluation would say. And, in prior public life, it would be, making the annual, actually determined contribution. But for here, as you can see in that one schedule, it hasn't, I don't think in the whole reporting period, there has never been the employer contribution percentage, what that equated to in dollars never equates to ADC. So the question would be this is basically strictly, it's 100% bargain employee plan with the exception of 4 individuals. So, that could be a bargaining discussion with them. If we were to put more money in than what's in there, it would obviously be a bargaining decision and discussion.
What's in the collective bargaining agreement is the floor of what we have to put in. But that is true. The board could make decisions to put more in, but that would come at the cost of other things we do service. It would come at the cost of, do we have that money to increase frequencies? It's part of our operating budget.
But I didn't know what the balance was between it being an annual from trying to get to a certain funded status.
And I think that when I got here, the report that I got from the prior CFO is that we had been putting in those minimum contributions required by the bargaining agreement, but we had not, to his knowledge, when he reported to me, ever put in what was necessary to fully fund it. That it has been unfunded for a very long time. It hasn't been a significant issue until, well, I can't say that. I felt it was a significant issue when I got here.
Yeah, the board, the first report we got at the board level was probably 2 months before David left. And we immediately saw that, and that part of it was discount rate driven at the time. The discount rate was such that it raised the number up pretty high, but it was alarming, to say the least. And so by the time we got around to negotiating the next contract, we started to try to fix it as best we could, and we got off to a good start. But, you know, and it's not unusual in the pension world to see big pension liabilities, but, you know, we didn't like it because it was our family that we were worried about. So still a working process.
There seems to have been some consistency in the numbers. If you look at it in a long-term graph, right? So like pension liability has been right around 80 million for 5 out of these 7 years, right? It was 108 early on, and it got to 79 or 80. And then the net position, which I think is a great number, really reflective, net position of what your portfolio is versus your liability. It's the consistent number for me. It looks like it's been right in that 40, 42%. You've been here a long time. That's a comfortable spot. Obviously, we're good now, but 6 months in, we're bad again. You know, the market certainly will come back when it comes back. But I mean, I think if you look at a long-term graph, 80 million of liability would seem to be kind of where you seem to land on average. Is that about expectation, or is that going to consistently go up?
It will go up with, you know, obviously the projections in the second sheet was the depletion analysis that kind of shows in the back tables. So the exhibit 2, the last page of the depletion analysis, and you'll see that, you know, the projected funding net position for each of the years. It would obviously grow. The whole rationale behind this depletion analysis is that as with the higher percentages, we were at, you know, if you look historically, it was down as low as 4% for the employee contribution. So now it's going to be up to 12%. So the salaries are higher now. So the pension obligations from 10, 15 years ago, current drawees are at lower points. So the actual fuzzy math, you're having a whole body of, and if we increase service, we'll have more operators contributing at a higher percent. So the new workforce will be taking care of some of the old liabilities. That's how they come to growing the net fiduciary position over the time. And that's assuming there's a whole host of assumptions with regards to, you know, 6.5% return on assets every year, like about a 2.25% return increase in salaries each year. So there's a lot in there, but, you know, what happens here is we're down, you know, 50 positions, and you know, we're having a tough equity market here. And then we also have, with the positions going down, we have people, instead of leaving the money in there to invest, they're taking the money out. So we're taking, I think we've taken out about close to $1 million in distributions in a down market, which doesn't help.
And new employees are being replaced in the system and having low liability because they haven't been around here long enough. So, I mean, it's obviously again, cyclical in nature. All right.
And to Julie's point, also 12%, it's right now at 10.5. That's going to go to 12% in October. That's kind of a large expenditure for a new employee coming in on top of medical and everything else like that. So, you know,
That's the employer contribution, by the way?
well, no, that's the employee contribution. Employee contribution will be 12%.
If I can add to that though, so when we did the union negotiation, we realized that we were asking them to increase year over year more.
Yeah.
Typically in negotiations, we were looking at on average a 3% increase to their salary. Knowing that this was going to take a bigger hit on them, we negotiated a 4% increase in their salary so that that increase that they were going to the pension would be offset to what we were giving them. It would also bring them up. When I first got here, new employees were making about $15 an hour. It brought them up to market rate. It covered the increase of the pension contribution. So when we came out of the idea is it would level set everything. again, best intentions, but no one saw COVID or the market change.
Gotcha.
But that's, so when he says it's going up 1.5%, they're also getting an additional 1% by contract, not covered part of that market.
Got it.
So John, what would you like back from us?
Well, that was, I mean, we wanted just to brief and to be aware. I mean, currently in the pension committee, we're working on the, the investment policy to make sure that, we adopt a current, a new version of it. We're scheduling meetings with the union to do that. I think this more or less is, probably just, making you aware as we come into the next collective bargaining session, is it something that we, that we want to focus on or have it as part of our bargaining position or so forth.
Okay. How do y'all feel about relative to board presentations around this?
Is there any action or is it just something we need to?
No action, just, I mean, it is an information point that likely will pop back up with our next negotiations.
Some of the things that, I talked, we had done some analysis of this in a prior life where we had a 5% employee contribution for 2%. And then we had Milliman, it happened to be Milliman at that place too, that came in and had a whole bunch of potential options, whether just increasing the 5% employee contribution to 7%, doing a hybrid, and so forth. So Milliman could come in and brief the members of the full board or the finance committee as to what are some options that we could do to that might be more contemporary and might be more beneficial to both the employee and the employer from the standpoint. Because I when I see an employee that's here for 7 years and then they're vested and then they take their money out and they're under age 59. So they're subjecting themselves to the 10% early withdrawal penalty if they don't put it into an IRA. So I'm not sure that all of them value or fully understand the complexities of the DB plan. So, we're looking at, discussion of the Milliman is some, one-pager education information for the employees, but there may be a better solution that could be brought forth that would benefit both GRTC and the employee base.
And is that something you all will talk about in your committee meetings?
We can talk about it. I actually reached out to Milliman. There is a, there's a cost to doing that, as well as right now we're very paper driven. So there's options about, you can do anything from outsourcing the actual benefit calculations and, online portals where an employee can access and so forth. We're very paper right now. So there's some discussions that we could consider, but there's a price to that. So obviously right now the actuarial fees and the audit are in that $300,000 administrative expense. So it's a joint committee between GRTC and the union. So I could bring those up to them. And if I know there was a question from Mr. Coles about the funding. If it would be beneficial, we could have Milliman kind of just go through this at the board level, very high level, and field questions if there's an interest to do so.
I would say, I think whether it's in finance committee or full board, I'd be interested to hear from the firm about what are not just our status, but what are the options we should be considering moving to that are more contemporary with what other similar public sector, organizations are doing. I think that is more helpful than just, information on where we are with our percentages and status.
And then if it comes to finance committee, and then finance committee could offer some additional discussion recommendations at the board level. Is that how we should be thinking about?
I'd be fine with that.
How does that, if it's something, so let's just say we put these things out there that could be collective bargaining, negotiations, et cetera, is that helpful to that process to kind of put things out earlier, or I'm new for me and I'm learning?
Yeah, the strategy there's multiple ways to think about the strategy. I think in the past, many union management negotiations, everyone keeps everything very, very close hold to be able to have the maximum leverage. Since I've been here, we have kept everything pretty much cards face up on the table. So this is our position, so that we're working collaboratively with the union. It hasn't always worked to our advantage to do that, but I think it should be something the new CEO should decide.
So to that point, though, it's kind of more of a, it'd be good to put out there either best practices or what direction the sector's going, but board is not making any decisions or recommendations because it's going to be a CBA topic, right? But it would be helpful for us to know what the paths are.
I think that if it is the desire of the board and the organization to put out options, the earlier we can signal to the union and start educating them on this, the better. There are definitely a lot of feels about the pension, and there will be heavy resistance to any change. So early education, I think, will be very important. And if that is the direction, having that out there, I believe would be beneficial.
Great. Then I would say if we could bring that to the finance committee, that would be awesome.
So John, in your committees with union board membership, are they taking that information back? Do you know?
It's a very slow process. And I think that there's, DB plans are very complicated. And I think that there's an opportunity for education, from everybody on the pension committee, and then to go back to the employee base, because there are questions that come into HR. There's, someone is taking a distribution, when they take a lump sum, they ask the question like, well, I've been putting in 10 and a half and GRTC put in 14. Where's GRTC's money? Well, it's the normal, if you retire at 62 and your life expectancy is 78, you take an annuity, it's the present value of that. And maybe your contribution interest cover the first 3 years of it. And then that's when GRTC money kind of kicks in. But if you're unvested, you're only getting your contributions plus interest. And if you leave on 7 years, you may not have broached the point of where you've gotten into the GRTC country. There's a lot of misinformation. They're expecting almost like it's a DC plan where they should have an account and see that I put in 1,000 and GRTC put in 1,500 and I get that back. No, you don't. So I think there's an education point of this that would help as well. And then, forecasting, obviously we do an annual GASB 68, and then it's almost going to be saddled with a depletion analysis as we go forward. But is there other options to get there?
So the education process with employees on this, union employees particularly, is there something that's happening with HR that gets them up to speed on this, or?
What I think we would like to do is because of the complexity of it, is to what I've asked, and we haven't gone forward with it, but I want to bring it through the pension committee as well. It's just to basically almost have like one pagers.
Yes.
Have Millen prepare a one pager that, Jane Doe is in the plan. She's started and she's leaving after 3 years.
Yeah.
This is how it's calculated. Jane Doe's here. She leaves after 7 years of service. These are her two options, and this is how it's calculated. With the, if you're not going to roll it over, you have a potential tax exposure. And then if you make it through to 55 and 20 years, you can retire early. If you're here, and you don't have the rule of 85, you retire at 62. This is what you could do. If you retire at 55 with 20, it's 5% haircut. And just walk them through the scenario so they can see what the relative importance of it is, and so that they can make their own educated decisions.
Yeah. So it's really more the HR side.
Right.
They don't need to get into a lot of this stuff because it is very complicated. Yeah.
I would say that John has been set up as CFAO, means that he is over finance, HR, and procurement. The HR is very, very short-staffed. They do a hero's job recruiting and managing what we can, but putting out additional information and education is a challenge. We have a whole HSA plan that we need to educate staff around this, and there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of angst around those. So having the additional funding to be able to support it with Milman and others would be very beneficial to the education campaign.
Okay.
So it's a topic I would like to bring up to the next pension committee meeting in conjunction with our discussions on the investment policy, because I'll be the first one. These are very complicated, and I have finance staff that don't fully understand them as well as HR. So.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So our plan is we'll get at the finance committee level, we'll get some of that presentation from them and go from there. Anything else on that topic?
No, it's good, thank you.
All right, that's all I see for major topics. Any other business that committee members would like to bring up?
I mostly just wanted to suggest a topic for our next committee meeting, if I could, which is, and I'm sure we may have other ideas that haven't occurred to me yet, but I would like to get either a presentation or have a conversation about the TISDAC formula and funding and how that is impacting GRTC's funding streams. I'd like to similarly dive deeper on federal funding streams and look at all of them collectively, not just the, what is it, 5307, et cetera, but IIJ, everything all together. And to be clear, I think the TISDAC conversation would impact us beginning a works dialogue about fare free and how that is funded, or how the board is considering that into the future. Because it does seem like TISDAC has an impact on whether or not that is actually something that the ridership helps support, the fare free, et cetera, et cetera. So almost Julie and John would like to see it almost presented, not quite a cost benefit analysis, but maybe more just like how does it pencil out, right? If you don't go fare free and you restore fare boxes, et cetera, what are those costs and what's that bottom line versus fare free with ridership and TISDAC? How does that impact bottom line and compare side to side with everything else out of the picture? But enable us to focus in and have a finance committee in-depth conversation about the how it pencils out.
If I may. So right now we are using one of the DRPT bench contracts. There was approval to look at doing some study about zero fares, the economics of it internally. That I believe is going to be completed here, initiated shortly. It should be a pretty tight time frame. The anticipations that would come before finance committee or the board in that October, November time frame. So you have a chance to make some decisions about how zero fares is incorporated in this next fiscal year before the localities do their budgets. So that does line up very well. And I'll speak a little bit out of turn here to say that I think that this is an incredibly timely topic. Zero fares has contributed exceedingly, a huge contribution to the fact that our ridership is well above what it was pre-pandemic. If we put fares back, we will see the elasticity, pull those ridership numbers back. Because our ridership is high, the TISDAC formula is suggesting we'll be receiving a significant increase in state funding up to a cap, as much as another $6 or $7 million annually starting in 2024, unless other places recover or unless the state takes alternative action. GRTC should see that money. It's not set yet. That money is largely because of zero fares. And I think it is reasonable to suggest that it should be considered as an ongoing revenue source to continue zero fares should the board decide that is the appropriate economic solution for the region.
So you're saying there are some analyses being run that would be presented more in October as opposed to September?
That is, the intention originally was to get it done in September. The time frame, the consultants who were bidding on it felt like they could not do the work in that quick of a turnaround. So right now they're looking at that October, November. But I would say that coming forward with the TISDAC numbers now, knowing what's going on at the state level with CTB would be a very good topic for this committee to address in advance of that.
So could we talk about TISDAC at the next meeting and then talk about
Yes, sir.
the balancing in October?
Yes, sir.
So Lincoln, how about, would it help if we have a broader summary of all of our government sources of funding? So John, maybe you could kind of lay out kind of all those different sources that we get, particularly from the government. Anything else that you feel?
And not just their numbers, but what drives them. Are they tied to ridership? Are they tied to other actions we take? Is it population based? Just tell us what turns those dials up and down on those funding streams.
And capital funds as well. Let's put in there.
Another item that would, I think, start in there, but since I was going to suggest that you have a list of upcoming topics to consider. There will need to be a discussion. Wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm going to go ahead and bring up the resource allocation between GRTC and Petersburg area transit needs to be considered in the coming months. That will be something that needs to be addressed by this committee. Also, resource allocation intra-regionally, how those resources are allocated as you look to expand into microtransit frequency and coverage expansion. That resource allocation model needs to also be considered and addressed. But I think TISDAC is your first good move.
Can we get maybe also a briefing about the costs associated with the, like, I guess it's the CARE rides or the
Paratransit?
paratransit, that's what I was looking for, thank you. And, you know,
Yes,
the funding streams that support that or how it's budgeted within our
that's
budget.
a
That's an
critical
area I'd
piece
like
of
to
resource
understand more.
allocation, yes.
Anything that happened in Petersburg we need to know about, or is it just kind of reassessment?
It's the same conversation we've been having for over a year, that the historic split that we get from FTA goes to 10% of them and 90% for us. We have been working with them for years to have more of an allocation that's data-driven based on the FTA measurements. We did discuss it with them last year. We were able to use the FTA allocations for the CARES, CRISA and ARPA, but when it came back to try and reinitiate the model to more objectively partition the money that's the annual allocations, those conversations have stalled. We are going to continue to talk with them, but if they continue to be stalled, there will need to be a policy level decision on how much this region wants to fight for that money to come back here. It's a draw out of this region to Petersburg, equivalent to approximately $1 million a year.
We'd like to learn more about that. I'm curious whether, I guess what the logic or how that comes about.
I have a model I can walk you through. Basically, FTA for this, what Julie's talking about is the formula 5307 and 5339. So the FTA allocates to the UZA. The UZA is Richmond and Petersburg. And then there's, the FTA, when they make the awards in March, they have various tables with factors. And in conjunction with the NTD, they're using 2019's NTD data that we put in as well as Petersburg. You basically can replicate the calculation of the award to the UZA. So our model basically takes the same data tables and just splits the UZA based on the NTD data and the population data, the density and the OPEX between Petersburg and Richmond. Very similar to what we did under the CARES, CRISA, and ARPA funding. It was 85% of your 2018 OPEX. So that's pretty easy. I know what their CAFR is, and I know what my OPEX is, and I know we could calculate the OPEX for the UZA based on what's put in the NTDs. So it was very clean. It's very transparent. It's very repeatable. The current draft is around 95.5, not 90.10. So 5307 is over $17 million. So they're alone, and then it's about another 1.5 million for 5339.
So I know that there's a limit on the meeting. This becomes a relevant topic because it is not just a matter of the economics of GRTC and PAT, which it definitely is, but also a question politically about regional subsidies to other regions. We have a lot of those conversations, and it could become very politically driven, especially as Chesterfield sits between both of those NPOs. And before it gets too out there, it needs to be discussed at the policy level. What is the policy decision for it? Do we let it lie at 90-10, or is this something the region should fight for, or that we should be supporting that reallocation in Petersburg? All relevant conversation, all valid conversation points. But should be a finance committee, should start here.
Yeah, I do have to get moving.
Sorry.
Anything else? Yeah, it's good for next meeting.
Sure. Do we have a date on that?
We don't have a set day and time, do we?
It was decided by the board to have these be at the discretion of the finance committee. And so without a chair to lead it, my recommendation would have either Ben or to Gary or on staff work with each of you to set a new date. Would you want to do it before the next meeting, or do you, for this finance committee, not before this one, before the,
And the next.
For the next
board
September
meeting.
meeting, yes.
Yeah.
we'll make sure to work with you all to get dates set up.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Is that rain up there, Joe?
Oh, yeah.
Is that rain?
Slow down a little bit though.
Yeah. It's spring
But,
now.
yeah.
Thank you all. I'm like, got chills. It's so exciting. Got our finance committee going.
Kind of keeping us moving.
I think this is going to be a really
incredibly useful training. I can't wait to see what y'all do in operations. I don't know, Washington.